You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we will show you how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus your life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll pull back the curtain so you can implement these tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Ciminillo. Hey guys, welcome to the Reinvest Podcast, episode 66. We've got some big goals for this next year. Excited to talk about those maybe in some future episodes here. We're going after some big guests this year.
We are. We have some big goals. Episode 100 is quickly approaching, so I'm not even going to reveal it yet, but we're going after someone big for episode 100.
Yeah, the energy's out there, so we just got to get it done.
Arguably, we almost have someone bigger for episode 66. And his name is Brandon.
Just Brandon, no last name.
Yeah.
No, Brandon Weis. So we're going to talk about it's a little different today. It's not real estate investment specific, but it is one man's harrowing journey against the elements.
That's a good way to put it. Thank you for having me today, Seth and Garrett. Happy to be here.
So Brandon, give us kind of a synopsis a little bit. You did something that few people in the world have ever done, and I know it sounds like a dramatic statement, but legitimately, you tried to tackle something successfully, which we're going to talk about today, that few people have ever done. So what is that? And then let's just jump into it today.
Yep, sure. So in 2021, I thru-hiked the calendar year Triple Crown, which means hiking a long-distance trail from end to end. And I did the calendar year Triple Crown is made up of the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast from Georgia to Maine, and then the Pacific Crest Trail on the West Coast from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, Washington, and then the Continental Divide Trail through the Rockies in the middle of the country, like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico. And then as a little bonus, I threw in there the Arizona Trail too, which is from Utah to Mexico. So when I set out on the trip to do that, only 10 people had ever done those first three trails in a single year. And yeah, I set out to achieve that goal and was fortunate enough to do so.
You kind of one-upped everybody because you did the Arizona Trail. Yeah. It was kind of that cherry on top that nobody else, to our knowledge, has ever done that. So really, you're the first person to ever do the Triple Crown in a calendar year and like the Arizona Trail.
That is true. That is true.
So if you're watching live on YouTube doing the video version, you're wearing a shirt right now, and it's got the total of how many miles that calendar year.
8,292 miles. So that's a long distance for those of you that just are super unaware about how far that is. It's very far.
Dude, that's literally longer than some people drive a car in a year. Yeah. Like, that's wild. And you did it on your feet.
Yep.
The old trusty feet.
So that's kind of, we really want to dig into that, but why don't you go ahead and tell us who was Brandon before all this, kind of your background. What did you do before you had this insane goal?
Yep, sure thing. So I grew up in a small town called Ottawa, Ohio, in Northwest Ohio. In my opinion, maybe one of the flattest areas of the country. So was not really used to elevation or mountains or anything. And then went to college at Ohio State. And while I was there, I signed up for a trip, somewhat accidentally, but signed up for a trip to go hiking out west in the High Sierra in California. And when I went out there, I just absolutely fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And when I got back from that trip, I was kind of wondering, is this a one-time thing or is this something I'm going to really get into? And I kept going back and forth for a while. And actually, funnily enough, I watched the movie Into the Wild a few months later, and I was like, nope, I got to get back out there. This is something I'm going to do. So then I started planning a couple like small section hikes, like a few days or a week at a time during breaks in college and whatnot. So then I finished out college, graduated in 2020 with a degree in finance and history. And before that time, or before I graduated, I had done like a few section hikes, so maybe 300 to 500 miles of hiking in total. And then my plan was to, after I graduated, I wanted to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in 2020, the Continental Divide Trail in 2021, and then the Appalachian Trail in 2022. And basically I wanted to do those three trails 3 years in a row. That's kind of more the normal way to do it than doing them all in a year.
Yeah.
Most people don't do them in a year.
Right.
Because they typically take people 5 to 6 months each to do one.
Each.
So I wanted to do basically one of those each year and then go back to school after that third one. So that was my plan, but that pretty much all got thrown out the window in 2020 because I had to cancel the first trip because COVID happened and wasn't great. But
which like, let me just pause for a second. A global pandemic kind of created this window for you to be able to tackle this.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have done this, because like I mentioned, my plan just to do those 3 in consecutive years.
Yeah.
But after I had to cancel it, I started thinking, okay, well, if I could do 2 of them in 1 year, then I could do the 3rd one the year after that. Maybe I could do that. And I was like, well, if I'm already doing 2 of them, I might as well do all 3 in a year. Why not? I feel like that's
it's like a BOGO sale. It's like,
Yeah,
I'm going to do 2. I could get the extra one for free and just tackle all 3 of them. And before we go any deeper, I just want to explain maybe to the listeners, like, why we're doing this episode, because real estate investment, business, entrepreneurship, really success in life in general, it requires grit. It requires that tenacity. And so when we had heard about your story, even though it's a personal journey of you're hiking and doing this, I think the lessons and the principles that you're going to share with us today are absolutely transferable to somebody who needs that in their life for their professional career, their business, their investment strategy. So anyway, I just want to make that little plug there.
Yeah, I think so. And that's one of my main goals with the book is, this book isn't just for people that like hiking or like the outdoors. I hope people can take this book and apply it to their own lives, just to show, that really, no matter how crazy an idea is, how crazy a goal is, anything is possible if you just just put in the work to get there. Anything you can do, really.
And so you mentioned that you self-published a book called "This Is Gonna Hurt: Through Hiking the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail, and Arizona Trail in a calendar year." We will have the link for that on Amazon for anybody who wants to go and listen to that.
There's a picture of someone on the front of that book that's just laying flat on their face. Is that you?
That would be me.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. That was from one of my toughest days of the year up in Maine. The terrain was just ridiculous. I covered like 15 miles in like 18 hours and was just dead tired. But
wow,
that picture, it was one of my favorite pictures of the whole year, because I thought it like perfectly encapsulated the journey. That, no matter how bad things there are, how bad you're feeling, how tough things seem, it can all be taken away, and it can all be worth it for a beautiful sunset that you get to watch. So.
Right, because you're on top of a summit there. So yeah, this is gonna be on my list here to read in the next few months to get that done. So we'll have that link, but it is in the book, just for people who want to know more about it. Okay, so COVID happened, and then at what point did you shift and be like, I'm gonna rip this Band-Aid off and go for all 3 of these?
Yeah, so it was probably, I don't know, that April or May maybe of 2020, I finally committed to doing all 3, attempting all 3 in 2021. At that point, I had just got a job in financial services for the year, because I had to get one after I graduated, because I wasn't planning on having a job because I was supposed to be hiking. But got a job for those 8 or 9 months, whatever it was, to save up money for it, and then just kind of trained like a madman.
What was your number of how much money you needed to for the equipment for that year of hiking?
Yep. So I wanted to be conservative. Obviously, I didn't want to run out money while on the journey, because it does happen to some people. While they're through hiking, they just have to go home because they're out of money, and that's kind of the worst way to end the trip, really, if you're having the time of your life.
Right.
But I wanted to conservatively have $15,000. When you're out on trail, most people say it costs about $1,000 a month, and I found that to be true for me too. Now that might change a little bit recently with inflation being 10% the last couple of years, but about $1,000 a month is all you need to live at least cheaply.
And is that really just for your food, or what are you spending that money on?
Yeah, food's probably like 70-80% of it, and then it's all about your preference too. Some people will get a hotel or a hostel every time they go into a town. I would do like once every 2 weeks, maybe a month, mainly just to get a shower. But yeah, that, and then just like restaurant meals, and yeah, those are really the only expenses.
You come strolling, and I bet those people and those that are along the trails are used to people just coming in raunchy.
Oh, absolutely.
Just gross. So, okay, so you saved up $15,000, kind of had a plan, and that's really one of the lessons, right, is you didn't just kind of jump in impulsively. You'd already been looking and strategizing how to tackle these individually in a calendar year over the next 3 years. So you'd done a lot of the legwork, researching it. Then you consolidated.
No pun intended.
Yeah. And the legwork was about to really begin when you started hiking. So you got 15 grand. How did you map out like what you were going to tackle first?
Yeah, so that was a whole major part of the planning process, because I knew I wanted to do these 3 trails, but obviously there's so many different not routes, but ways you can do them, because you can do all 3 straight through. However, with the winter conditions, that's not always possible, and
Right.
it didn't end up being possible for me. So I knew I wanted to do most of the Appalachian Trail in the winter, because you can't really do the 2 western trails in winter because the mountains are so much higher. The snowpack is so much more, and it's just the avalanche risk is much greater, where there's not really that risk on the Appalachian Trail.
Let me just say, there's people that they've never heard the words avalanche risk in their lives. So I just want to commend you for that, that was a reality for you.
Yeah. But yeah, winter on the East Coast is bad, but it's basically not as bad as the high mountains in the West. So I wanted to do the Appalachian Trail in winter, and then I was planning on, if I would get to a point where the snowpack was just too ridiculous to keep going, I would go west and then do as much as I could on the Continental Divide Trail. So basically New Mexico, before I hit ridiculous snow there, or in Colorado. And then my plan was to do the Pacific Crest Trail, ideally all the way through, and then finish out either the Continental Divide Trail or Appalachian Trail later in the year. And that's what I ended up doing.
And you had a goal of how many miles you knew you needed to do per day to hit this goal of finishing this in a year. And what was that?
Yep. So to fit it all the miles in basically the weather window where you can hike the trails, I knew I needed to average, at least my estimates for myself were to average 24 miles a day on the Appalachian Trail, because the terrain's tougher on that one, because it's not graded for horses. The 2 western trails are graded for pack animals, so they can only be like a certain level of steepness. But on the Appalachian Trail, they don't care. They just go straight up and down mountains. So my goal was on that one was to average 24 miles a day, and then out west I wanted to average 30 miles a day, and that would put me in roughly the 11-month window to be able to hike the trails. And when I ended up when I totaled up the numbers at the end of the year, ended up being like within 0.1 miles for both those averages.
Leave it to the finance guy to be that close to his goal. You know what I mean? Like, first of all, I'm just kind of like, yeah. If I finish, that's great. But then you really nailed that on the head, which probably speaks to the level of preparation you put into this. Talk about the fitness preparation that you had. I mean, you just alluded to the fact that you grew up in Ottawa, and it's flat out there. Mm-hmm. So you're going from that to Pikes Peak, all these different places.
Yep. Yeah, so I knew I wouldn't be able to really train, climbing up and down mountains, or even hills for that matter. So really my mindset was I wanted to get my body used to putting in a lot of miles. So I knew that would be running. And then I still want to continue weightlifting, but I cut back on it and mainly just focus on lower body strength and endurance. And then I wanted to work on a lot of core strength, because obviously that's major for anything.
Yeah, you got a pack on your back.
Oh, yeah. But then I also did some unorthodox training methods. I really wanted to build my ankle and like hip strength, so I did a bunch of exercises to build those up so they could, remain strong throughout the year, because they would be taking a lot of beatings. And then I would walk or run barefoot a little bit every week, just to kind of toughen my feet up.
Dude, let me comment on that. So the Vibram 5-finger shoes, have you ever heard of those?
I've heard of them.
Okay, all right. So let me just say this. When I was a senior in high school, they had just come out with those, and it was like trendy. They looked goofy. It's like wearing a pair of socks that are shoes, and that's just wrong. So I got a pair, and they came with a disclaimer on it, and they're like, hey, because you're running barefoot, this engages different muscle groups than you're used to with running shoes. And I was a senior in high school in the middle of track season, so I'm like, yeah, okay, for those guys, but I'm not going to have an issue with that. So they're like, wear these like 10 minutes a day for the 2 weeks before you start running in them. Yeah, obviously I didn't do that. So I just slapped these puppies on, went down to the track, and I just barreled for like a half mile.
How'd that go?
Oh, dude, I was on the back straightaway at the track, and I was like, oh, I'm cruising, I'm feeling good, I'm fast, and then within 30 seconds, both of my calf muscles went and just seized up, and I just collapsed on the track, and I was just writhing in pain. So running barefoot, my point to that is that it's different. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of really ease into that. You can get hurt.
Yeah, I mean, especially with how much we all wear shoes now, our bodies are just not used to it. So yeah, you really got to ease into it and mainly just walk. You got to walk miles and miles before you can even
run a half mile. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Wow.
So okay.
How much were you running? I mean, what was kind of your running regimen? If you were trying to get long distances in, how much were you running a day or a week?
Yeah. So I started out very much an average Joe. Like before I started training for this, I was just focused on weightlifting. I really didn't care about cardio or anything else. So when I started out, it was probably only a couple miles at a time, maybe up to 5-10 miles a week. But then after a few months of training, I got up to doing 40 to 60 miles a week.
Wow.
That's a full load.
Yeah.
I mean, people who are running ultras that's what they're running a week, it's 40 to 60 miles.
The biggest pain it hurts physically, but
It's
the biggest
time.
pain with that is just the time is ridiculous.
Yep. Because you're getting up early. I mean, you still have to live,
Yep.
And so I remember training for the marathon. We get up at 4 and you go run 15 to 20 miles, get back by 7, 8 o'clock and then go do your day.
Yep.
So
Also tough in winter when it's, unpleasant outside.
Wow.
yeah,
And
because
treadmills suck.
dude, you could not run on a treadmill for longer than an hour. If you do, you're psycho. I can't trust somebody that runs on a treadmill exclusively.
Oh, then we got a problem.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I switch back and forth between treadmill and outside, but I just hate running in the cold in the winter. My throat burns. My nose is running. I don't like it.
I want to give a shout out to Chad Ensley, who's a local guy, owner of Dash and Joey's, and he is a man of all man. Like he runs outside. He doesn't care.
Mhm.
He likes it. He's one of those weirdos where he just
psycho.
leans into it.
Psycho.
Yeah.
You're like, I know the type.
So, okay, cool. So where'd you hit the trail? Tell us about walk us kind of through the journey a little bit when you're on the trail. And then in your book, you brought out some lessons that you learned through that time. A lot of self-reflection, a lot of just leadership principles, a lot of just life principles.
Yep. Yeah, so I started the trail in Georgia in early January, heading north towards Maine, and actually had a bit of a life lesson on the first day, and it had not a breakdown, but a bit of an existential crisis immediately after I started. As my parents were pulling away from the parking lot after dropping me off, my brain just went to the worst place possible, and it was just recurring thoughts of, why am I doing this? Why did I commit to this? This is such a bad idea. There's no way I can possibly do this. This is a ridiculous goal. Only 10 people had ever done it. Why did I think I'm so special I would be able to achieve this? And those thoughts were just ringing around in my head for hours and hours and hours. So that first day was pretty awful. But then I got to camp that night, and that's kind of the beautiful reality of through hiking is you can quit if you want, but you got to hike back out to the nearest road.
It's not
Get
easy.
to the nearest town.
Right.
You got to get a hitchhike to go somewhere. You got to get home. That's going to be a plane ride. So
You kind of burnt the ships a little bit.
yeah. When you start, yeah. But yeah, that first night I got to camp and I had a little powwow with myself and kind of told myself, stop thinking so negatively. You knew this going into it. You knew this was a ridiculous goal. You shouldn't be intimidated by it now. And then from that next morning onward, I really didn't think about the entire year in its entirety again. It was just the big picture was out of my mind. Now I was only thinking about the thing immediately in front of me, just those small goals. So I broke it down to, I never thought about, I need to make it to Maine. I need to make it to Mexico or Canada. I just thought, I just need to make it to the next town. I just needed to make it to the next camp tonight. I just need to take these next footsteps in front of me.
Yeah.
And once I started thinking like that, I felt so much happier, healthier, and really my progress just was so much easier.
That's interesting. I mean, first of all, your mind had to kind of go there, right? To face that overwhelmingness feeling. But then the thing that helped you work through it was the fact that you'd already done all the heavy lifting and the mental planning.
Mm-hmm.
Now you just had to work the plan.
Yeah. And I had put in the time before I left. I mean, I knew that it was going to be, I was going to have those thoughts probably. And I tried to mentally prepare myself just by reading other people's accounts and then, watching other people achieve crazy things, watching inspirational things like that. But yeah, I knew the mental struggle would probably be harder than the physical struggle during the journey. And it definitely was.
Wow. So I have a quote on my phone just because my personality has to remember this. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your preparation.
I like that.
You had done a lot of that work already, so you can kind of take confidence in that. So cool. So what happened next?
So after that, I basically kept hiking northward until I got to Vermont by middle of March. And there was a lot of, problems, things in there. But if you want to find the details, get the book.
As a teaser.
A little case of frostbite, a little case of potential hypothermia.
Hold your fingers up. Did you lose anything?
Nope.
Okay.
No permanent damage. They get colder quicker now and they hurt more, but
wow.
No discoloration or anything, thankfully.
Nerve damage.
Yeah, a little bit.
Sick.
They had another night where it was negative 20 degrees and I was sleeping out in my tent. That was pretty rough.
Gosh.
And yeah. Another little teaser for the book. Just a lot of mice stories because there are mice all along the trail because they're used to people, camping there, dropping their food. And
Right, it's an
those things
opportunity.
are savages in the winter because they're all starving. They'll eat anything. They'll eat socks. They'll eat sleeping bags. They'll eat your feet. They don't care.
No way. Dude.
They're crazy.
Little mice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my
Anybody
God.
who had an irrational fear of mice now has a rational fear of mice.
That's fair.
That's crazy.
But yeah, I kept hiking northward until I got to Vermont by like middle of March. But when I got there, that is still so early to be hiking in Vermont. I figured Vermont's an outdoorsy state.
Right.
People are going to go hike in the winter. The trails will be tracked out. There will be footprints. There wasn't a single footprint in the woods.
No one's crazy
So
enough.
and no one's dumb enough. So the forest was just like 5 to 6 feet of flat white snow everywhere, and
I mean, beautiful,
it was beautiful
but savage.
but savage. And there's just nowhere to tell where I'm supposed to go. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I'm roughly hiking northward, but the trail weaves
Yeah.
east
I
and
could
west,
get
south
lost
at
pretty
times.
easy.
Yeah. So I was having to check like my map and my GPS every 5 minutes. And after a couple days of doing that, I was like, this is not worth being here. I'm moving like a quarter of a mile an hour. I can't
Sustain
if
that.
it's not sustainable to be able to achieve my goal.
So again, another really good lesson here. Sometimes when you're in business, you're pursuing a plan. In your head, it starts out one way, but maybe there's variables that you couldn't anticipate or factor in, like this that you're talking about. So the question is, when do you pivot? When do you make that pivot?
I think
that
that's
was
the
a
tough
hard
part.
decision, right?
Yeah, because I mean, to be successful, you do have to bang your head against the wall for long enough. You have to push through tough times, but at the same time, you have to know when it's not feasible to do so
Yeah.
anymore.
Because you didn't even know if you left, if you would have the ability to come back or if you'd make it back. So you're kind of giving up finishing this trail, even though it was obviously your intention to come back and finish it.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of, you just never know what's going to happen on the other trails.
Yeah, I mean, I could have gotten hurt. Could have, the main issue would have been going too slow on the other one because I knew I had to finish the other two and get back to this one before winter hit
Came
again.
back
And
around.
then, yeah. So it was a risk, but I knew I would have to take it to be able to achieve the whole year.
So you pulled off in Vermont from the Appalachian Trail, which BT dubs. I have been on the Appalachian Trail for a half mile.
Heck yeah.
Klingman's Dome, right where at the summit. What is it? Is it Cademan? It's Klingman's Dome.
Klingman's Dome.
Klingman's Dome.
Right
Yeah.
by the parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally, we bypassed the concrete path up and hiked the Appalachian Trail, and then made our way to the top. So
Yep.
that's my
Half
story.
mile on the Appalachian Trail. Life
You
goal
know,
accomplished.
actually saying it out loud now in context of your story, I feel a little dumb, but
Hey, well, congrats. You made it on the highest point of the Appalachian Trail.
that's
so
right. Thank you. Yeah, drove to there. So
he doesn't need any pats on the back, Brandon. It's okay.
I'm gonna write a book next. No, so you went to the Continental Divide Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail next?
the Continental Divide
Okay.
in New Mexico, Mexican border, and then started there. That would have been like March 20th around there, and then hiked the whole state of New Mexico, and then a little bit in Colorado, but then
Talk
kinda
about
the same thing
drastically
happened.
different. You hop
Oh,
on a
yeah.
plane out of Vermont with 5 feet of snow in the mountains, and you drop in New Mexico.
Yeah, it's like I don't know what to even compare it to, but it's funny now looking back at it. I was so nervous to go to the desert because I had like driven. I did road trips like driven through the desert before, but I never really lived there or done much there.
Yeah.
But so I was nervous about the water and
Or the lack thereof.
the lack thereof water. Yeah,
Right.
And I knew everybody's perception of the desert isn't really true. Like it's not always hot. Like it gets cold at night. So I knew that. I knew I would still have to be prepared for cold nights, even though kind of our training as humans says like, it's not gonna get cold in the desert. But it got down to like 20 in the 20s at nights.
Wow.
Which was a little crazy.
Wow. What were the stars like? I mean, there's no light pollution out there.
Yeah, I've never seen better skies than in New Mexico.
Dude.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Dude. You always see those photographers that do a time lapse
Yep.
of the sky at
Yeah.
night. And
Unfortunately,
you're
the
like, "Is that
iPhone
real?"
camera is not that good yet.
Okay, all right. Come on, Apple, get on it. Cool. So you started hiking from New Mexico on the continent. Did you? How far did you take that before you?
Yep. So I made it all the way through New Mexico, which is about, I think, 600 or 700 miles, and did a little bit in Colorado, but then basically ran into the same problem I did in Vermont, except there was more snow because the mountains are higher. So there was like 8 feet of snow when I got to the San Juan
Jeez.
Mountains in southern Colorado. And that was still mid to late April, but the snowpack there is just insane. So then I called it quits there, and I was happy to finally head back to where it was all supposed to begin on the Pacific Crest Trail, A couple years earlier.
PCT.
Yeah,
that's what we call it out there.
Okay.
you do know. Yeah. Sound like a regular. But I was really happy to be starting that one when I was, because it was right around the popular time for normal hikers to start. So I knew I would be seeing people left and right.
Did that help your mindset?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I knew going into the journey most of it would be alone, but I knew the worst parts, or the most alone, would be on the Appalachian Trail in winter and then on the Continental Divide Trail out of season. But I knew on the Pacific Crest Trail I would, not have to just talk to myself all the time in my head.
Yeah.
Because you get a little tired of that sometimes.
Right, getting in your head.
At any point, were you afraid of dying on any of these trails?
There was 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 instances, but they're pretty long stories.
Read the book.
Save those for the book, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Which is kind of the crazy reality of you doing a challenge like this, is that it was like, it's not like you had to do the challenge, or no one was like putting a gun to your head and saying, hey, you got to do this, but you were willing to put yourself through this much pain to accomplish a goal.
Yeah.
And to get somewhere, meaningful. And obviously, high risk. People do die on those trails, and people get lost all the time on those trails and have a hard time making it back.
And we talked about this off camera, but I want to mention it. It made me think of David Goggins and his book, his audio book, his story, that mentality of like, no one's pushing you to do this. You're just choosing to do it because you're setting the bar so high for yourself. No one's setting it high for you. And if you know of how to get to him out here, it's one of your goals to connect with him in some capacity, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I could get a copy of my book to him, that would be, a major another achievement unlocked.
All right, Reinvest community, you got to help us now. So, all right, cool. So you pulled off it was refreshing to have some other hikers kind of helping you, just having somebody, that relational aspect, because when did you start that? In April, you said?
Yeah, late April.
Okay, so you're talking about 3 months worth of hiking on your own from January to April. Now you got some people around you. And it starts in Arizona, you said?
The PCT starts in California at the Mexican border.
Okay.
But yeah, it was cool being around other people, but I knew all the relationships or like meeting people would kind of be fleeting because, I had already done 3,000 miles of warm-up hiking, basically getting in shape and, getting my body in the perfect sense it was supposed to be able to do this.
It's a humble way of saying they couldn't keep up with you.
That is, yeah.
Yeah.
So really, I was just passing people left and right, and hang out with them for a little bit, talk to them. If we get to camp together, I'll hang out and talk for like an hour before going to bed. But really didn't link up with anyone for a long time, and figured I wasn't going to just because at the rate I was going.
Yeah.
But when I got to around mile 1600, I linked up with this other guy who. We camped together one night. We both slept in the next morning. That was one of my problems. I was always pushed way too long at night and then couldn't get up the next morning.
Yeah.
But
not because you were lazy, but because your body was saying you got to get rest.
Yeah. I mean, I always tried to get 8 hours of sleep, but definitely probably got closer to 6 or 7 most nights of the year, which is crazy for how hard I was pushing my body.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I ended up talking to this guy one morning. He's like, hey, how many miles you doing a day? And I was like, oh, usually around 30. Expecting him to say like, oh wow, that's a lot. I can't keep up with you or whatever. But he's like, okay. The 2 people I've been hiking with are getting off trail in a couple days. I'll see if I can keep up with you. I was like, okay, cool, yeah, we'll see. In my head, I was like, okay, buddy.
What a joke.
I've heard this one before.
Never gonna see this guy again.
Yeah. But then he kept up with me that day and the next day and the next day, and we ended up doing the last 1,000 miles together, and now he's one of my best friends.
Whoa. Yeah, that's crazy. So obviously you still keep in contact with him. Is he from California?
Unfortunately, he's from Vancouver, so
not
so close to each other.
Wow.
Even further.
Yep. Shout out Hammer.
Hammer,
awesome,
you know who you are. That's crazy. That's sweet. So you weren't expecting to find somebody that would be able to keep up with you, let alone have a relationship with. Because I feel like even if you do hike with people for sections, it doesn't mean you're gonna like be friends on the back end of it.
Yeah, I mean it's like anything else, making friends in life. You don't want to be friends with everyone you meet.
Oh yeah,
right.
But we just gelled together so
well,
perfectly.
Obviously he had some similarities just at the pace that he was hiking. In terms of the discipline, because you always want to surround yourself in people who are like-minded. You're kind of the sum average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And it's been said by other gurus and people, about that. So he obviously shared a lot of the same ideas, values, and discipline you did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we did a really good job of, pushing each other about as far as we could possibly go, but still at the same time, we were both so, I don't know if relaxed is the right word, but I guess it's just like fun and positive that it was easy to, kind of go to that brink of the edge, how far you can push yourself, but keep going and not go too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Wow. So you finished the PCT all the way through.
Yep.
Where'd you go next?
Finished that late July, and then a quick story about how great trail people are. So after me and Hammer finished the trail, we stayed at
That's a trail name. What was your trail
yeah,
name?
my trail name was Horsepower.
Horsepower. Oh, from Ottawa, Ohio, baby.
Yeah. So actually, another little aside, for like a 3-day stretch, I was hiking with Hammer. So it was Hammer, Horsepower, and then we had another guy with us named Terminator. It was like the hardest sounding group of all time.
Dude, freaking don't
Yeah,
mess
that's
with
awesome.
us unless you're trying to roll. That's awesome.
But after we finished, we ended up staying with this family for like 3 days to rest up before we all, left. They went to go home, and I went to go to the Continental Divide Trail. But we stayed with this family because when Hammer and I were at a random gas station to buy food and groceries in southern Washington for a couple hours one time, there was this other hiker that rolled up, and he was doing a section hike for like a week or a couple weeks or something, and he had just finished. So we were just, talking about the trail and life and whatnot, and he mentioned like, oh yeah, I'd be happy to host you guys after you finish your hike if you'd like. We're like, yeah. So we talked to this guy for a couple hours, and he ended up driving 2 hours to come pick us up at this remote trailhead after we finished. Stayed at his house for like 3 days. His mom's cooking dinner every night. It's like a 5-star hotel, and then drops us off back at the airport or wherever to go where we need to. So just the kindness of people around the trail community is really, I've never seen anything else like it.
That's awesome.
You get in the trenches with somebody. He gets it. Because when you kind of push yourself to that level, you understand how meaningful that would be to you. So to extend it to somebody else, feels natural. Or maybe not natural, but you understand. So was that a weird moment when you finished? Hammer's going back, to plug back into life, and you've got some unfinished business.
Yeah, I tried. I'm not a great salesman, but I tried my best. Hey, why don't you just hop on the Continental Divide Trail with me? It's not that long. It's only 3,000 miles. But he had some commitments he had to get back to and couldn't. But yeah, it was different, definitely, after going back to a 100% solo journey after having basically a friend with you for 1,000 miles. It was a much different mindset, and especially on the Continental Divide Trail because obviously having people around is always helpful, but when you start in Montana, you're in the heart of grizzly bear country, and that's just a whole nother animal you got to deal with, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So wait, you just kind of glossed over that there. Not just the weather being a variable, but now you've got wildlife that'll claw your face off.
Yeah. So
you're really nervous about that.
I was going into it because people can be afraid of black bears, but at the end of the day, they're just big dogs. They're really not a threat unless you're holding a candy bar in front of your head. They're not going to attack you.
Or a cub.
Yeah.
I have a black bear story, by the way, but it's another time.
At Pinkman's Dome?
Yeah. It was in the Smokies. It was.
It was his half-mile journey. He
got attacked by a bear in his half mile.
You'll never believe what happened in that half mile.
But yeah, grizzly bears are just, they're much more aggressive. They can be much more harmful to people. So I was worried about that going into grizzly bear country.
Did you have a can of spray?
Yep. So I only carried bear spray in grizzly bear country. And if anybody's thinking like, oh, why don't you bring a gun? Bear spray is more effective than guns in studies, and guns really all it's going to do is make them more angry. So bear spray is really the way to go. And yeah, I was carrying that, but at the same time, the best defense against grizzly bears is being preventative. So really that's just making as much noise as you can because, they still are afraid of humans. They're going to stay away from us if they hear us.
They're not looking for a fight.
Yeah.
But you don't want to startle somebody. You don't want to startle one.
Yeah.
So if you can let them know you're there, they'll go away.
And that's much easier, when you have people around, you can talk to people. But I just had to talk to myself like an idiot every once in a while to make sure, stay away.
That's why. So did you see any?
Only saw one that year. I went back in grizzly bear country the next year and had a couple more encounters that weren't as pleasant.
What? No, is that in the book?
That's not in the book.
Did you have
Might be in the next book.
Did you have to pull out bear mace and?
I don't think I pulled it out at all that first year. No real threats that year.
He keeps saying that year.
Yeah.
So all right, well, we're gonna have to hit that another time. But so now you're on the trail. Did you finish that second half because you pulled off in Colorado?
Yep.
Now, did you go Montana to Colorado or Colorado to Montana?
Yeah, so I started in Montana at the Canadian border just because, by that point, that was July 30th, so it's the heart of summer. So you want to start somewhere north and head south as it's getting colder. You don't want to be heading north as it's heading into winter in Montana, because winter in Montana can start in like late August or September, because it's crazy there. But yeah, headed south to where I ended in Colorado, and actually did a little bonus 300 miles there, because I had to take some shortcuts or alternate routes, because basically the whole Idaho-Montana border was on fire when I was there. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I had to take some different routes off of what it was supposed to be, which cut off a few miles. Then I added a little 300-mile bonus skip at the end.
So a cherry on top of the cherry on top.
Yep.
And so you're watching, I mean, you could see the smoke from the fires and stuff.
Yeah, that was a bit of a downer that year. I could still enjoy the views in Montana, but really I only had one day where I felt like it was clear and like this is how it probably normally is.
Because visibility was so low.
It was pretty bad, yeah.
Okay.
Just because there was so much smoke. So I knew that year that I wanted to come back to Montana some other time to check it out, and thankfully I went back next year, and there was not major fires then.
Redemption. Yeah.
So then you finished that trail, and then you went back to the Appalachian Trail to finish that off?
That's right, yep. So I headed back to...
Can I pause you real quick?
Yep.
There's some debate in the hiking community, Seth. Okay. And
this
what
guy's acting like he's a hiker.
What we are debating is which of those three trails is more difficult.
I know my answer for sure, and I think my answer lines up with most people's, but not for the same reasons.
Okay.
I would say definitely the Appalachian Trail.
That's what I thought.
But
which I've been on.
Seasoned vet. But I think most people would probably say that just because for most people that is their first hike. So I think I could have these numbers off by now, but I think between 5,000 and 8,000 people start the Appalachian Trail every year. And I think about 20 to 25% finish, whereas the Pacific Crest Trail, 4,000 or 5,000 people start every year, and about the same percent finish. The Continental Divide Trail, I think it's between 500 or 1,000 people start it every year. But the Appalachian Trail just has so much more of a population base, reputation, and it's just much more popular because the East Coast, it's more densely populated, and it's older and has more tradition. But yeah, so most people do it as their first hike because they hear about it first. They want, I want to go do that. So I think that's why most people would say it's the hardest, which it was for me too, my first real hike. But for me, doing it in winter was just insane. I truly don't know if I could do that again. Because I started out, I was green-eyed. I didn't really know what was going on. I was like, okay, this is how through hiking is. It's supposed to be this miserable, this cold, this wet, this isolating the whole time, when in reality it's not for most people.
Well, and you probably start talking with other people, and then they're kind of like, shoot, you did what?
Yeah.
And then you saw it wasn't normal.
Yeah.
But you had no context when you did it because it was the first thing you'd ever done.
Yep. And it was just so brutal. I don't know if I could do it again. So I'm glad I started out with that one rather than end with it at the end of the year.
Don't tell David Goggins that.
Yeah.
He'll yell at you.
So you finished, and what's the summit in Maine? What's that called where you finished? Katahdin.
Yep.
So Katahdin.
Yep.
Okay. So what was the last, as you were coming down the home stretch and you were closing in on the last few hundred miles? I mean, like rewind January, you're in Georgia and your parents are pulling away and you're, crying emotionally inside, being like, why did I ever try to do this? And now you're a couple hundred miles away from finishing not just the Appalachian Trail, but full circle 3 trails in the U.S. in a year. What was going through your head?
Yeah, so I'd say it's a little bit of what you would expect, but then also not some of what you would expect, because I actually so it's not the picturesque cinematic movie ending scene you would think, where I step on Katahdin at the end and I scream at the top of my lungs. I hate it. Didn't do that. I actually started at Katahdin when I headed back to the Appalachian Trail, and then headed south to where I ended, just because Katahdin is in a place called Baxter State Park in Maine, which is pretty highly regulated, and they only have a certain period of the year where you're allowed to summit the mountain. And typically that closes October 15th. And if I would have gone back to the Appalachian Trail and headed from where I ended to go north to end there, it would have been closed. So I would have not been able to summit or do it illegally, which I didn't want to do.
Right.
So I started there, then actually headed south to where I ended in Vermont. And in that last 500-ish miles, my mind was racing all the time because I was 99% confident I was going to finish. But still at the same time, it's always a thought in the back of my head, what if I roll an ankle? What if I break a hip right now? What if? But
what if the mice get me?
Yeah, what if the mice slit my throat in the night? But those what if thoughts are just our own insecurities. We shouldn't give those credence. All they really do is hold us back. There's no positive to be gained from them. So I just kept going because really that's all I could do. And
talk about that as a theme in your book.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw that back to how we shouldn't worry so much about things out of our control. Because when you're doing something, when you're working towards something, either something is going to happen or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't control it and you're thinking about it all the time, all that's really going to do is create more stress for you, make you more likely to commit a mistake on something else where, you actually had control over this event now, but it happened because you were worried about something that wasn't even really in your control.
Right.
So really, I think that's mostly stoicism. It's just controlling what you can control and not worrying about anything else.
Wow, that'll preach in today's society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I was heading towards the end, there was so many big picture thoughts running through my head about the journey, about accomplishing this, but I was trying to push them all out of my head because, like I mentioned on the first day of the trip, I only wanted to focus on what was immediately in front of me, and I didn't want to get ahead of myself about finishing. I didn't want to get too cocky early on before I finished.
Yeah, dude. There's YouTube's filled with premature victory dances.
Oh, yeah.
It's great. You should do it sometime. It's good entertainment.
But when I did reach the end of where I got off the trail in March, it felt really special. It felt, I don't know, very powerful.
Because that was the place that defeated you. You know what I mean?
Guess, yeah.
Kind of like it. That's
It's
where you had to
I
pivot.
bailed, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that wasn't my end point because now, I like doing so much bonus miles, bonus stuff. So I didn't want to end at this random road crossing where I got off the trail earlier in the year. So I told myself I was actually going to make my end point my own mountain, my personal Katahdin, Stratton Mountain, which was another 50 miles down the trail from where I ended. So I got to the point where I ended and I actually did a bonus 50 miles to get to.
Now, is this number right here, does it incorporate the 300 miles that you did in Colorado?
Does, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
All the bonus stuff.
Yep. But when I got to my actual endpoint on Stratton Mountain in Vermont, it was the opposite of like a cinematic perfect ending, but it was the perfect ending for the Appalachian Trail because it was so horrible. I got to the end. It was pouring rain for like 16 hours straight. It was like 36 degrees.
Dude, it was
visibility
raining. It was 36 degrees.
Yeah. Well, and the main reason I wanted to end at this point is because it has a fire tower lookout, and it was going to be scenic. I was like, I'll get there. It'll be a scenic endpoint.
Right.
I could not see past 5 feet in front of me.
Oh, my gosh, dude. The irony of that
it was a
wild.
perfect way to end the Appalachian Trail.
Wow. That is crazy. So you ended in the rain on your own little personal mountain, Vermont. And I think I can do this. I kind of like glorify things, or I like kind of, I'm an idealist. So I kind of like paint this rosy picture in my mind, but that's freaking life. Yep. That's how life is. Like you accomplish a goal and it's like, there's no fireworks and
it's like that cliche saying it's not the destination, it's the journey. You know what I mean? Like put that on like a picture on Instagram, and you're like, but it's true. I mean, for you, I mean, the ending wasn't really, that wasn't the pinnacle of the accomplishment. It was the whole year.
Yep. And I mean, that's like you mentioned, most goals you'll set in life are, the roadmap is not going to go the way you think it is. For the 3 years, whatever it was, before I left for this journey, when I pictured myself finishing the Appalachian Trail, I pictured myself on top of Katahdin at the end with my arms hoisted above my head in ultimate triumph.
Right.
But, that's not the way it went. That's not the way life goes.
Yeah.
And that's all right.
So, all right. Normally, we would have a show segment called Our Smaller Pockets, which is kind of tell us your worst real estate deal. I know it's a different episode. So, we're going to intro Our Smaller Pockets. As the audio clip suggests, this is not your highlight reel. This is something that went wrong, and I'm sure you have a couple of things that went wrong. So give us like one of the top few that stand out to you as like this was a low point, or this was some random crazy thing.
Yeah, there were quite a few. So I got plenty to pick from, but I guess I'll probably go with one that I think was likely the worst night of my entire life. So I was in New Mexico, and as I mentioned earlier, our perceptions of the desert are not real. It gets cold at night. It does rain. It does snow. So on my second night in New Mexico, I started hiking in New Mexico with a brand new tent I bought. I was so excited because this was a trekking pole tent, so it doesn't actually have tent poles. You just use your hiking poles to set it up, which is really good for saving weight.
Right.
Because saving weight is a huge part of
What was your
this whole
average
journey.
pack weight?
So it depended totally on the seasonality. I'd say in winter, the base weight, which is a term that means, everything you carry, not counting food or water, was like 18 pounds. And then in the summer, it was 10 or 11 pounds.
Okay. Could you tell a difference on 8 pounds?
Oh, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, I started in New Mexico with this brand new trekking pole tent. So excited. The only problem was my tent got delivered when it was supposed to in New Mexico, but my trekking poles didn't. So I had no poles to set up this tent. I was like, well, whatever, it's the desert. It doesn't rain here, right? That's not going to be a problem. I don't need to set up my tent because I'll cowboy camp. And that's just a general term for like sleeping under the stars.
Yeah.
And really, I preferred doing that because, saves time for setting up a tent. You can get up quicker in the morning. Things are just easier.
Yeah.
I like doing that. So I was like, I'll do that for the first week or so till I get my poles. It won't be a big deal, whatever. I even pulled out the weather channel app and 1% chance of rain every day. That's perfect. It sounds like the desert. No way it's going to rain. So hiked the first day just fine and dandy, whatever. And then the second day I finished. It's around like 9 p.m. Probably go to set up camp. Lay out my cowboy camp spread, get everything laid out nice and neat, lay down on my sleeping pad for the night. My head hits the pillow. Within 10 seconds, it starts raining.
No. And what's the temperature?
Well, then it was probably like 40, around 40, maybe a little higher.
Listen.
But it will drop.
Well, no, listen. 40 degrees in rain, no matter where you are or who you are, is cold.
Mm-hmm.
Like, unless it's like 70 degrees and raining, that'll chill your body.
Oh, yeah. So then when I felt that raindrop in my head, I was like, all right, I guess we're doing this. So I packed up all my stuff, threw it in my backpack because I had a rain cover in my pack so stuff wouldn't get wet.
Which your priorities now were keep my stuff dry.
Yep. Because, your number one, stuff is not such a huge deal, but if your sleeping bag gets wet, it's totally irrelevant because it runs on, it uses goose down or duck down, and if that gets wet, it loses all of its insulating power.
Wow.
So I really needed to keep that dry. So I threw all my stuff in my backpack. And I was like, well, I might as well start walking again, even though I was dead tired because it was already like a 28-mile day or whatever. So I started hiking again, and it just got worse. The wind started blowing probably like 30, 40 miles per hour. It was so freaking cold. And then actually after I started hiking, I realized I forgot to put on my pants, so I was just hiking in my underwear.
What? No way. You had like this lucid moment of, whoa.
So then I hiked probably another...
Dude, you would freak some people out if somebody like just came across you, you know what I mean? Yeah. And they're just like, what the heck is that guy doing?
There's a rabid man hiking in his underwear.
Listen, officer, 10 miles ago, there's a guy in his underwear just hiking in the rain.
Yeah. Well, that's the beautiful thing about the trail in New Mexico is most of the time it wasn't even actual trail. You're kind of just going cross-country across the desert.
Wow.
That's really what it was most
markers?
of the time. Occasionally, yeah.
But the markers were rocks, like with white paint on them or something.
Sometimes, yeah. So I think you're talking about the white paint on the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, okay.
Those are called blazes. They put those on the trees on the Appalachian Trail. But out west, the trails are much less. Not sure if developed is the right word, but there's a lot less markings. They're a lot less well made because they're not as old. They don't get as much maintenance, and they're not as many people to take care of them.
Gotcha.
But on the Continental Divide Trail, there were occasionally signs or wood posts where you're like, okay, I guess that's the trail because there's a wood post here. But yeah, so there was some of that, but it was mostly kind of just, reading your map, using your GPS.
So you're in your underwear.
Yep.
Just hiking.
Yep. Middle of the desert. So if I saw someone, I would have been worried too. Like, why are you out here? No one else is supposed to be out here. But yeah, then I probably hiked another 90 minutes to 2 hours before the rain stopped. And I was like, all right, finally. Because I was freaking dead tired. So I want to go to bed. I found this little like gully where there was some shelter from the wind because it was still blowing like 40 miles an hour. So I set up my cowboy camp there. I laid down on my pillow. Within 5 minutes, it starts raining again.
Oh.
I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't hike anymore. I'm so tired. It's the desert. It's not going to rain that long. It's a 1% chance of rain all day. How long could it rain for?
How long did it rain
and
for?
It rained for 6 hours straight.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, and the temperature dropped. I think it had to be just above freezing because it was so cold. I think it was around 35 or 36 degrees. and the wind was still howling, but I did have a little bit of a shelter in the
Did
gully.
you have your pants on yet?
I was in my sleeping bag, and I don't think I put my pants back on, but it was just so miserable because the sleeping bag got soaked through, so it was totally worthless. And all night, I just felt every single raindrop hit my head, slowly cascade down off the side of my face, and then fall off. And it was just so cold.
Wow.
Every single drop felt like just an ice bath. It was so bad.
Now, from a survival perspective, kind of just preventative, knowing your body and when you're in danger, did you have signs of hypothermia or?
I was thinking about it all night. I probably slept 10 minutes all night. I was thinking about it, but really didn't know what else I could do because I felt like I couldn't get up and move anymore, which probably is the number one indicator of hypothermia. So
you're like, I'm just going to close my
can't
eyes. Hey, no.
Yeah, and that's especially tough when you're alone because like the other time in the year I was worried about hypothermia is when I was trying to go to sleep. So if you're alone, really the only way to notice it is if you're like nodding off or trying to fall asleep, which is easy to notice if you're around someone else.
Right.
But if you're alone and it's bedtime, it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, I'm tired,
Yeah.
But, one way, Brandon, that we always tell about hypothermia is if you can't touch your pinky and your thumb anymore. So that's science.
Yeah, I'll check that next time.
Is that really science?
Well, it's Wikipedia, bro. What do you want? You know what I
Okay.
mean?
All right. We're going to jump into our little nugget. So, Brandon, why don't you give us one takeaway or one principal piece of advice to give to our listeners for their life? It could be applicable to their real estate investing career, but what do you got for them?
If this journey taught me anything, it's that no matter who we are, no matter how, much we're experienced in something or not, we're all capable of really anything we want to achieve. That's kind of one of the themes of the book. But as long as you have a goal, no matter how crazy it is, no matter how distant it seems possible from what you've done previously, you can do it as long as you put in the time, put in the time for the preparation, put in the work, actually on the goal, whatever you want to accomplish. And really at that point, it's just time is the only thing that's going to take.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Because and here's the reality of someone setting out to accomplish any goal, or if it's a business, or if it's you're trying to get into real estate investing, and you're like, well, I don't know how, I don't have the money, that's not for me, I can't do it. And Brandon and many others have taken away those excuses, and it's really just about putting in the time and the preparation. And maybe people would look at you, Brandon, and say, oh, well, you probably grew up in the mountains, so you were kind of perfectly poised to take on a challenge like this. But you grew up in farmland of America. It was like flat as flat can be out here in Ohio. So, that's just so practical. It's so practical for people not to make those excuses, but to push through those and say, hey, if I want to accomplish something and get there, I got to put in the work. And I'm the one that I need to hold myself responsible and accountable for that.
Yep. And it really doesn't matter what part of your life you're in or have been previously. Because, I hadn't done a backpacking trip or camping trip until I was 20 years old. And then, just 3 years later was able to achieve this, pretty monumental feat just because of roughly 1 year of extreme dedication and preparation.
More people have hiked Mount Everest than people that have accomplished this Triple Crown trail walk.
A lot more.
So,
Wow.
Just kind of sink that in your brain. That's kind of weird to think about. So
I do want to come back again. Brandon's the only guy that's hiked the Triple Crown and the Arizona trip in a year.
True.
So now someone's going to listen to this and go do that just to beat it. But
I'll add one more on just for fun.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So let's talk about how can people kind of follow your success. Let's talk about the book a little bit. I have a copy coming to me through Amazon in the next couple of days. I'm going to read it. I'm excited. You've teased me enough to really dive into some of the stories here. First practical question. Did you journal through this time?
Yeah.
To help you then get to the point of writing a book? Or did you just sit down and be like, okay, what happened at the end of all this?
Oh, no, there's no way I could have done that. I knew I wanted to journal on the trip every day. I hadn't been doing that in my life beforehand. It's always, like a lot of people, something I think about, but, just for whatever reason, I'm too lazy to do it, don't actually do it. But on the trip, I knew I wanted to journal every day because this was going to be one of the most, if not the most, special, influential,
monumental moments,
things in my life. So I knew I wanted to try to capture every day as much as I could. And I felt like my journaling did a good job of that. And I didn't really even think about writing a book until maybe halfway, 3/4 of the way through the journey, until I was like, this is a pretty cool thing. And a lot of things have gone wrong on this trip to make good stories. So
yeah.
this might make a decent book. But yeah, I journaled every day. And then once I got home, still wasn't 100% sure if I was going to write a book until I did get home and finally decided, like, this is something I'll start and then see how it goes. And yeah, just referenced all my journal entries and just reading back through those. If I hadn't done that, I don't know what I would have done, because I remembered maybe 30% of the stuff that I wrote in those journals.
Wow.
And just, yeah. But the level of insight I could gain from, just a few notes each day was like, oh yeah, now I remember that. Now I remember that.
It was enough to kind of trigger that memory of,
Yep.
So it says here, this came out in November of this last year.
That's right. Yep.
Just a couple months ago.
Yep.
Awesome. So, I mean, talk about the discipline and the journey to publish a book.
That might have been harder than the hike even. So, and maybe more things went wrong with it. But writing the book wasn't the hard part. I wrote it in 90 days on the dot, which, wasn't super hard. It's not like I wrote a novel, I didn't have to, make up all these characters,
right?
Determine what the ending was going to be, how are all these storylines going to tie together. The story was there. It was just putting it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that in 90 days, and then I left for another hiking trip the next year. Ended up being about 5,000 miles, but
Whoa.
Yep.
Just sprinkle that in there.
Yeah, it's a little bonus. But when I left for that trip, I had like 4, maybe 5 people volunteer, like, hey, I want to help you edit the book. I'll be happy to do it while you're gone. So send it all to them. And then I was planning, like, okay, when I get back from this next hiking trip, the book will be fully edited, and then I can send it to the publisher and I'll get it out. It'll be that simple. But life's never that easy. So I got back from the trip, and it turned out that nobody that volunteered to edit it did it.
Oh, man.
And so I kind of wasted 8 months. Just figuring these people were working on it, and they weren't.
Wow.
So then I got back from the trip, started working on some pivots on how I was going to get this book edited, because, you can't edit it yourself. You miss the same mistakes over and over again. You need another set of eyes on it.
That objectivity.
Yep. So then I started looking online to hire someone to be an editor, and I went on like Fiverr.com, and there were a lot of options, but I think for a true like world-class editor would be way more money than I would even make from the book. So I went with a cheaper option on Fiverr, and it turned out not to be great, considering that I think a junior high kid could have done a better job editing it. Literally all they did was put in hyphens in some words. It was just ridiculously bad.
So you get what you pay for.
Yep. So that wasted another 3 months, because they also delivered it late. So that was another disaster. So this editing process was just like problem after problem, and I was wondering.
Which feels silly to you. You're like, I've already done the hardest work.
Yeah.
I just need somebody to tie a bow around it.
Like I've done what I can do.
Yeah.
And now I just need someone else to help, but I can't afford someone to, I can't drop $10,000, $12,000 on an editor. So then I was complaining about it one day when I was getting adjusted at the chiropractor, and my cousin was also there, and I didn't realize it, but she was in college and actually thinking about being a book editor.
Oh.
So then she volunteered, like, oh, how happy to help. And then she did a very thorough edit, did an awesome job, even taught me more about the English language than I already knew. So she was very helpful. And then after her, one of my mom's friends, who's a retired teacher, she's looking for something to do with her time. She did like 4 or 5 edits and just loved it. So that's my best piece of advice. If you want to write a book, just find a retired teacher, find someone that really wants to edit a book for free, because
who's capable.
Yeah. And as capable is the main thing. Yeah. Because I mean, if you're just an average Joe trying to self-publish a book, to hire an editor online is probably going to cost more money than you'll make from the book.
Right. Wow. Well, listen, we're going to put the link in the show notes. Guys, I'd encourage you to go check it out. I'm excited to dive into this. Lastly, if people want to get in touch with you, how would you encourage them to do that?
Yeah, so really the only social media I use is Instagram. So you can follow me there at Natural Horsepower. Try to do, occasional outdoor posts there, and a lot of things are about the book right now, because obviously it's a big part of my life,
right? And
hoping to get back out to the outdoors pretty soon.
Yeah. So what's your next goal or journey?
Yeah, that's the tough part now. With a normal 9-to-5 job, can't get away as much. But even aside from that, probably partially from the journey, but also just my own body, I've had chronic back pain for about a year now, so I really haven't been able to do much hiking, running, or anything I really want to do. So that's kind of my number one goal in life right now, is to get healthy and get back to being able to do, these things I love to do.
Yeah.
Because it's hiking for me, could be investing in real estate for a lot of people, but when you get the thing taken away from you that you love the most, it really is very humbling. It's like, I put so much of my life into this one thing, and now because of something out of my control, I can't do it anymore. So appreciate everything while you got it, and make the most of it while you can.
Dude, what a great way to end this. Guy, yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Man, it's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys.
As always, excited that you joined us on another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. If this episode added to your tool belt or left you feeling inspired, go ahead and share it with a friend. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch with us, go to our LinkedIn or Facebook profiles and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. See you next time.